So we are at the top of Tzadi Aleph Amid Aleph at 91a, and we saw in the Mishnah, Ramatzniya Zera, somebody puts aside seeds or anything that we saw in the previous prakim. We had seen that if there's a minimum amount that people would typically keep and it would be valuable, and that amount, being that it was kept, would make it significant. And then when you carry it, you're carrying a significant enough amount in order to be chayiv, in order to for it to count carrying on Shabbos and a transgression. However, what happens if somebody puts aside even less than that? And somebody sent me a question yesterday, a very valid question. Well, what happens if somebody puts aside a little bits in order to build up to the typical amount? There he wouldn't be carrying it out because he's still building up, so he wouldn't carry it. The carrying it out of the house to the public domain is a sign that they now have enough and it's worthy of them to carry it. However, as our Mishnah says, carrying it in, where you're collecting, you're bringing it in, there the requisite amount would still be the typical requisite amount. So let's say nobody would seed less than 5 seeds, and this person is building up their collection, so they get 1 seed and they bring it in to put it aside. That would not count as the requisite amount, even though that they are putting it aside, but they're putting it aside to build up to the full amount. But once you carry it out, now you're indicating it is you're carrying it from your house to the public domain. You're indicating this is enough significance to carry, and you've set it aside. So then that's our Mishnah, that when you carry out something that you yourself have kept and stored, so that is sufficient, even though that for everyone else, this is less than the amount. Gemara said, so why don't we just say if you carry it out? To tell you that even if you don't really remember what value it had for you, why you set it aside at the time, and it's less than the requisite amount, it counts. Because the initial purpose that you gave to it is maintained, even though you don't remember what it is, as long as it's not just meant to toss aside. As the top line of the Gemara, last word, the top line in Tzadi Aleph and Aleph, we'll begin there. Kamash Malan Kola Oisa Al Das Rishayna Oisa. Anybody that does things, when he does it out of the first intent, and that's why it's going to count as something of value. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel Machayev Ha'ir Rabbi Meir Av B'Moitzichita Achas L'Zriya. Rabbi Meir would say that you're chayiv even if it's just even if you only took out 1 seed to take it out to plant. And where it says pshita, that seems obvious. Kol shehu tanan. In our Mishnah it says if it's something that you keep, kol shehu, even if a minuscule amount would be sufficient to make you chayiv. And where it says no, ma'u detema kol shehu lafuke migrageres. Normally with food, we say it has to be the size of a gregaris, which is a dried fig or fig. And when we said kol shehu in the Mishnah, any amount, it means you don't need the full amount of a gregaris, a fig size, but you do need at least an olive size. Kol shehu ma'u detema kol shehu lafuka megregeris la'olam. However, ad ika kazayis, you still need a kazaya size, and if you don't have a kazaya size, then it wouldn't count as anything. Kamash Malan, even 1 seed is sufficient. And that's the chiddush that Rabbi Meir is saying. That of course our Mishnah is in concurrence with Rabbi Meir. In fact, as a general rule, we have as a Stam Mishnah Rabbi Meir, any unattributed Mishnah is the language of Rabbi Meir, and so. And so when we have a statement of a mayor that says even 1 seed, and our Mishnah, when it says any amount really means any amount, and it doesn't have to be a kazayas. Maskefla Rav Yitzchak Bereder of Yehuda. So Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Yehuda challenged that. Well, if you're saying it's totally based on his intent, and since he wants to plant this, it's going to count as significant on the basis of his intent. Well, if somebody intends, he says, I'm only, I'm not going out until I can bring the contents of the entire room, the entire silo, the entire storehouse. So would we then say he's not going to transgress unless he actually carries all of that? So Gemara says no. Of course, that in general we say that the average amount that everybody would carry is the average amount that everybody is held responsible for. But his intent is nullified by the typical standard intent of all people. And typically when somebody carries something, they carry enough for a typical need. And the minimum typical need and the minimum typical requisite amount is already given in the previous Mishnah, in the previous Mishnayos, in the past, in the past Tractate. So here, what we're dealing with is somebody made something valuable to themselves beyond what the others do. Of course, so essentially what the Gemara is saying is there are two ways of seeing something of significant enough that if you carry it, you're going to be chayav. Either the standard, and the standard is what most people do, and even if I would never do that little, or you say I wouldn't do that little, but that is the amount. And we talked about it a couple of months ago, 5-6 weeks ago, when about a wealthy person versus a poor person. Machlokas Rashi and Tosos there. But the concept is that there's a general requisite amount because that's what typically people would carry, and that counts significant as a matter of significance. Then we have somebody who says, look, I know it's not significant to anyone else, but for me it's significant. So then it will also count as carrying. But we're not going to be lenient and say, look, that's insignificant to me. Yeah, but it's a matter of significance generally. It's a significant enough matter, and therefore it would count as carrying. So we're now about 10 lines in on Tzadi Aleph and Aleph at the 2 dots. We're going back to the Mishnah. The Mishnah said that even though that for this person, he's put it aside, he has saved this up, and so therefore to him this is a matter of value and significance. And when he carries it, he's chayav. But all other people that carry his very item, they would not be chayav. And as you remember, Shimon Elazar says differently. Rabbi Shimon is of the opinion that when somebody carries something that the person who owns it saved it up, and even if it's less than the requisite amount generally, but the owner of this particular item did save it up and does consider it of significance and matter, and therefore, when it's carried not only by the owner but by anybody, they'd be chayiv. And our Mishnah does not agree to that halacha. Masnisin the loika Rabbi Shimon Elazar, and our Mishnah does not follow the halacha that Rabbi Shimon Elazar said, which we don't paskin like. Which, in fact, we go with our Mishnah that it only the person themselves that stored it and they themselves carry it. That's when there's chayiv. But a person that the person carrying it's not significant, even if the owner considers it significant, they will not be chayiv. That's our Mishnah. However, Rabbi Shimon Elazar said the Tanya we learned in a brayse, Kollel Rabbi Shimon Elazar kol she'eina kosher latzniya, anything that's not worthy of saving up, ve'ein matzniyin kamoyu, and generally people don't save it up. V'huchshur lezeh, but this person considers it significant for this matter. This is what it's made for. And he considers it significant enough to save up. But not the owner himself who saved it, carried it out, but someone else did. Which we just said in our Mishnah would say, that's not significant because the one who's carrying it out doesn't consider it significant, even though the owner does. Now, however, Rabbi Shimon Elazar says, Rabbi Shimon Elazar says, that indeed the one who carried it is going to be held liable on account of that the owner is the one does consider it worthy enough to store and stored it. Amar Rava, before we go further, and we saw earlier that this could apply to an apprentice who works for his teacher, his master, and there he's held responsible to the level of the master. And then we have this opinion of Shimon Elazar that takes it to everyone, even if somebody's not beholden by the teacher and not an apprentice, but anybody, because and on account of that it's owned by this person who considers it of significance. The next Gemara is going to go into the minimum requisite amount fluctuating by intent.
Could I ask a question? So it's
Sure.
almost like, is this, I mean, it's Meleches Machsheves, is that part of the equation here?
In which point?
I'm saying that because someone considered it significant, and the second person took it, was Moitzi Rishus Yachid to Rishus Rabim. So therefore, he's going to be Chai for Itzah because in the das of the first person that it was significant. So it's sort of like Meleches Machsheves.
No, good question. The question is, what's the reason that we're following the owner's intent versus the carrier's intent? Rabbi Meir's, our Mishnah says we go with the carrier's intent. It's not on account of Meleches Machsheves that you have to have intentional action. They're all intending to carry this. This is not an unintentional act. And they may even be intending to carry it for a particular purpose. Rather, the reason is it has to be a matter of significance. And if it's not a matter of significance, we always have lint in our pockets and some schmutz on our hand. And at what point is it a matter that is worthy of carrying? It's not an act of carrying. So this is not the intent that's going to define the action. We did see some of that, but rather the intent is going to define significance. It's going to define whether or not I'm actually carrying something. And I'll give you an example. We saw that if somebody's carrying less than a gorgeris of food on the plate is absolutely a matter of significance, but the plate is not what I'm intending to carry. Rather, I'm intending to carry the food. So there, Meleches Machsheves Asur Torah. There, where Michael is where your point comes into play. That since my intent is to carry the food, and the platter, the bucket, whatever it may be, is simply a utensil to carry something else. My intent is not to carry the plate. Therefore, I'm going to be exempt on the plate, and my intent is to carry the food, and the food doesn't have the requisite amount, so I'm exempt on that. That's where, Michael, your point of Meleches Machsheves, the action has to be an intentional action, and here my action was not the intent to carry the plate, it's to carry the substance. Here, all of these discussions were really about, well, what is a matter of substance? What counts as a significant enough item? Lint? No. One thread? No. I mean, I may want the thread, but there's nothing I can really do with it. Ink to write one letter? That's not significant because it's not worthy enough, and typically people don't carry that. So it's not a significant item. So I'm not actually carrying. It's a definition of the act, not the definition of the intent. The intent would define which item that I'm carrying do we focus on. Here, all of these discussions are really the definition of the act itself. am I carrying, or do I have dirt in my hand? Do I have a little dust in my hand? That's not of significance enough. And here we said, if typically it's significant, that would count. Or if I have saved it up so that to me it's significant, that would count. Rabbi Shimon Elazar says, no, even if it's not significant to me, but the owner of this very item considers it significant enough that he saved it up, that is enough to say that the substance is a substance of significance enough and defines the act of carrying.
Here's where it feels like to me like a gray area, because it's not talui in the shiur itself, the measurement. It's talui in the das of somebody. And
what's dependent on his intent?
What it's talui in his das that he saved it, that he thought it was significant.
So, no.
Because,
not. I want to correct that. Not his intent, but his action. It's saving. He saved it, so it's more than just intent. But you're right.
Here. He says machshavtoi.
Yeah,
that's what got me the thinking. If his neighbor takes that out, but his machshava, the first person's machshava was that I'm going to save it, then something that's talui and das is going to make it chayav versus patur.
Yeah. So the machshava here does not mean melechas machshavas. The intent here is not that, but rather the intent is whether it's significant. But that is the point. There is an intent here with an action of saving it in creating a matter of significance. And according to Rabbi Shimon Elazar, it becomes a matter of significance on account of that, not only for the owner, but for anybody that carries it, because it belongs to a person that considers this a matter of significance. But again, the significance is defining it as a substance. Once it's a substance, then you're carrying substance. Otherwise, it's just dust. It's nothingness. Just like we would understand that something that's a piece of lint doesn't count as I carried something because that's of no significance. So to anything less than intentionally saving it. Now, Reb Shimon Elazar says, of course, if you saved it intentionally and someone else carries it, but it's yours and you saved it, that counts. But it's not on account of I need intentionality in defining the act, which will come into play right now in the next step, but not in this point. So let's move on to the next step, which is going to bring in Michael's point of that some aspects are intentionality of the action versus intentionality of the substance, but it will change the substance itself. So we had a requisite amount when I'm carrying something for food, and we had a different measure of requisite amount when I'm carrying something to plant or to write with or whatever it may be. So if you had food, it always needs to be a gregarious. So what happens if I carried at first with the intent of planting this seed? And then when I'm putting it down in the public domain, so I pick it up in my private domain, I carry it across the threshold into the public domain, all while intending to plant it. And then I said, you know what, I'm not going to plant this. Maybe I'll eat it. And I put it down with the intention of eating it. Does that change it? Because the requisite amount changes. I have the requisite amount for each one, but so it's enough to transgress. But the three parts of carrying are not under the same intent. I'm intending to do something else with this item of significance, and we'll see other variations of the same question. So we've seen many times now that the act of carrying into a public domain is defined by three substantive acts that have to happen in one. They have to count as one. So it has to happen as one. And if there's a break in intent or something else happens between, it could break that. They are akira, the uprooting or uplifting something from its place, ha'avara, transferring it over the threshold between public and private domain, or 4 amos within a public domain, and then putting it down. So the hanacha. So it's akira, ha'avara, and hanacha. And if in the middle your intent changed with the definition of the item of what I want it for, so I had a requisite amount anyhow. It's just that my intention of what I want to do with it changed. Does that change and split the action in as much as that I don't have a complete 3-step action? That's the question that Rava asks. Sorry, I jumped ahead. Amar Rava. So Rava said, Amar Nachman, in the name of Rabbi Nachman, I took out a fig size for eating, a gregaris, which is the requisite amount. And then I changed my mind. I'm going to, you know what? I'm not going to eat these seeds. I'm going to plant them. Or vice versa. Chayiv is going to be chayiv. Either way. So Gemara says, Pshita. Of course, that seems pretty obvious, because either way you have the requisite amount. You have olives. You have a fig size, which is significant enough to eat, and you have enough to plant as well. You have enough seeds. Zilhacha kishura. Either way, you have the requisite amount. So what did Rava tell me in the name of Rav Nachman? It seems pretty obvious. So Gemara says, no, the reason is because I may have thought that all 3 steps, the carrying, the uplifting, carrying, and putting down, all the akira, ha'avara, and hanacha, all have to be done with the same intent. And if you change your intent of what you want to do with it, why it's significant to you, that would be enough to break it. Kamash Malan tells us that no, that's not enough to change the meaning of what you're doing. So Rava asked a question. I took out a half fig size to plant. It's enough to have enough seeds to plant them. And I intend to plant it, but it's not enough to eat. So at the time that I uprooted it, it actually wasn't enough to eat. It rained as I'm carrying it. Drops fall on these grains and they expand. I now have puffed wheat, which in the expanded size now equals a grogeris. But and then I say, ooh, these are good for eating. And I decide to eat it. And at that time that I would continue carrying it with the intent of eating it, or I put it down with the intent of eating it, at that point it's enough to eat. So here Rava adds another factor into the question. Of course, he says, if you pick it up with the intent of planting it and carry it out with the intent of planting it, and then by the time you put it down, you decided to eat it, but it had a requisite, it had enough, either way, of course, then you're chayiv. But when I picked it up and I intended to plant it, it did not have enough to be chayiv for eating. It wasn't enough to eat. But it had enough for the act I was intending to do, which was to plant. And when I put it down and I did the third part of the 3 parts, at that point, it already had enough to carry, to eat, and I'm doing it with the intent of eating. So at each step, it had enough for the thought that I had and the intent I had with it, but it would not have been enough if I had switched the intents. Somehow, in the first case, he's chayiv, the zilhacha ikashira, because either way, there was a requisite amount. But over here, at the time that you took it out, it wasn't enough to eat it. Perhaps you'd not be chayiv. Or perhaps, even the ilu ishtik v'le'achshav, if he had been silent and not had an actual intent about it, michayiv amachshava dizriya, he would have the initial intent of planting it would have been sufficient, and you'd be chayiv on that. Hashlanami mechayiv, so too, your intent is not going to change it and say, look, at the beginning, had you carried it out, this is enough to plant, and therefore that would be significant enough, and therefore it remains significant the entire time. And if you tell me, look, if he had no intent, it would have been significant enough because you can plant it. Hashtanami mechayev, and therefore now too, he's going to be obligated on account of that. When he took it out, he intended to plant it, and by the time he thought to eat it, it was significant enough. Well, what about this case? He took out these puffed wheats that had some water in it, and so it was puffed to the size of the size of a gregaris. And as he's walking, they start drying out. It's a sunny day, and they dry out, and they're now less than a gregaris in size. And he says, you know what? This isn't even enough to eat. It's shrunk and it's hardened. I'm going to plant them. I'm not going to use them for food. I'm going to use them for planting. And he intends to. So the rest of his walking and putting it down is with the intent of planting them. Now, what about here? If he had remained with the initial intent, which was for it to be food, it would not remain significant enough, and he would be potter. He would be exempt from bringing a korban on account of, at this point, it's no longer food. It's no longer a significant amount of food. And therefore, when he did the third part of putting it down, he'd be exempt. But nevertheless, he changed his intent and turned it into seed, and by his intent, saying, I'm going to plant it. And so by the time he put it down, it was enough, significant enough to plant. But the initial intent does not remain of value. So therefore, L'mechayev, he would not be obligated to bring a korban. He'd be exempt because he didn't have the initial intent, does not remain of significant. Odilma basar hashtazlin. In order we say no, each point you look at the point that it's up to, and initially it was worthy of carrying on account of food, and that's what his intent was, food. And by the time he changes into the intent of carrying it for planting, it was worthy of planting. Odilma basar hashtazlin. So we go at the moment that he does each step of this transgression of carrying, and each time there was a requisite amount, there was enough for that step. And therefore he's going to be chayiv. The imtim salomen, if we would follow that logic, basar hashazlina, and we look at it at each moment. What about hotziger geras lachila? He took it out with the intent of eating it, and at the time that he took it out, it was wet enough and inflated enough that it was a gregaris. But samka, and it then shriveled. It got dry along the way from the heat of the sun, and it dried up to some degree, and it's now less than the requisite amount. But then it starts drizzling again, and water gets onto it, and it inflates again, and blows up again. B'tavcha. So he started off, and he ended off with the requisite amount, with the intent of eating it. But in the middle somewhere, it went to less. Does that split the action? It's all one action. He picked it up and continued walking, and then put it down. And at the whole time, he intended to eat it. And when he picked it up, it was worthy of eating. And when he put it down, it was worthy of eating. It was significant enough. But in between, it dried up some, that it became less than the requisite amount. It shriveled to the degree that it's less than than a fig size, a gregaris. So does that break it up? Because in the middle, it didn't have the requisite amount. Yesh dichui le'inyan Shabbos, ein dichui le'inyan Shabbos. Here the Gemara states it in a fundamental question. Do we say that if in the middle of the action, it was no longer worthy, and therefore there's a dichui, it's pushed aside, it no longer can obligate you in a sin offering, in a chatas, and once it's pushed aside, it no longer has its significance. Or do we say, no? Or do we say, there's no such pushing it aside, and it would count as one action? Do we say the akira and the hanacha, the lifting up and the putting down, is going to be two actions because there's a break? The halacha pushed away this action in the middle somewhere as insignificant? Or do we say, no, the entire action is one, and because the intention remained the same, and in the beginning and the end, it was indeed the same. Teku. So we leave that question unresolved. Rava asked Rav Nachman, Zora kazayis teruma lebayis tame. Somebody throws teruma at a kazayis size, an olive size, into a house that is tame. Mao, what's the halacha there? So Rav Nachman had said that in regards to carrying on Shabbos, the intention will change the requisite amount, but there's a requisite amount in each one, and therefore it's going to be higher. So Mao, so the Gemara asking, what manner are you asking? Lamai ila inyan Shabbos. Is he asking on the level of Shabbos, carrying gregaris bina for food on Shabbos? It has to be a gregaris, and obviously teruma must be eaten. So we're talking about teruma as food. As food, it has to have not an olive size. It has to have a more significant size. It has to be the size of a gregaris, of a fig. Ila inyan tuma. If we're in the matter of tuma, whether it's in order to make something else tuma, which Rashi holds that susceptibility to tuma of food is at any point. It's to make other things tuma. Is an egg size, kabetza. You need kabetza of food. The Gemara says, "Lo lemli in your Shabbos." No, his question is in regards to Shabbos. However, it could go in the ikapachas mekabetza oichlin. However, his question is: there's less than an egg size of food. And this teruma is next to other food that is less than an egg size, but this would now combine this would now be put down in the tummy house as a comment and combine into the egg size mouth. So they hear the question is midamastarif linyan tuma michayev nami linyan Shabbos or dilma koli linyan Shabbos kegeres bina. Do we say like this, that since in regards to tuma, the less than fig size combines together with the egg, with the almost egg size, to make an egg size in order to transmit tuma, and since for tuma becomes significant, even for Shabbos it'll also be significant, or do we say no? We don't look at its significance for tuma, and for carrying on Shabbos it has to have its independent significance, and it's not enough for food. It's less than a gregarious size. So in matters of Shabbos, in carrying, independently it's going to have its value, and it doesn't. Even though that once I put it next to the tummy item, it's going to have value in as much as that it'll combine to a egg size, a kabetz of tumah to transmit tumah. Imtim tzalema, amalei tenisua. So he said to him, we learned that the breads of the mikdash of a korban, whether it's the 2 breads of Shavuos or the 12 breads of every Shabbos, the lechem apanim, the measure is its food. The kohanim eat it, so the measure is a gregaris. Va'amai, and why do we say that it's a gregaris? In regards to other halachic aspects of kachim, of something that's eaten in the Beis Hamikdash, it has a greater requisite amount. It has a greater significance because even a less amount counts. So now we're on Tzadi Aleph Amid Beis at the top. So in regards to the prohibition of taking these out of the Beis Hamikdash, now psul yotze, that halacha is that if you take 1 olive size of it out of the halachic space that it needs to remain in, you took it out, there's a transgression of yotze, 1 olive size. So there's the olive size in regards to the halacha of the kachim remaining in the holy, in the kodesh. It has to even 1 olive size counts. So perhaps carrying for Shabbos should also be that 1 olive size counts. And we don't say that. We say no, since carrying for Shabbos it needs a significant amount of food, it has to be gregaris. So to here. So the Gemara says, Hachi hashta. How can you compare the two? There, as soon as you took it out of the space of the Beis Hamikdash, out of the Azara, out of the walls, it's now invalid korban. It's invalid kodesh food. You can't eat it anymore on account of Yotzei. However, the moment that he's going to transgress Shabbos is only when he actually takes it into a public domain, which is not at the walls of the Beis Hamikdash. There's more defined spaces there. Shabbos v'tumah b'adi adadin kasim. But over here, the tumah aspect and the Shabbos aspect happened at once. So perhaps there, the reason it doesn't combine, that we don't say that the requisite amount for Yotzei is the same as the requisite amount for Shabbos. And an olive size is to transgress because it doesn't happen at the same point. One is as soon as you walk out of the doorway of the Azara. And the other is when you go to the public domain, which is past the Chil, which is other spaces in on the Temple Mount. Here, at the moment of Tumah and the moment of carrying happens at the same point and should combine. The Mishnah continued and said that if he changed his mind, somebody saved up one seed, decided to plant it, and then said, you know what, I'm not going to do that, and changed his mind and carries it back in. The carrying back in is not going to be a transgression because at that point, it's not a matter of significance anymore. Pshita, that seems obvious. So the Gemara says, Abai explains, here we're talking about Kagan Shazarka, he throws it into a storehouse. And in the storehouse, you can tell which one it is. Since you can tell where it is, and he threw it into the storehouse, so therefore it should count as an individual item. And sort of like the question that I was asked about saving up. Here, essentially, he's saving it up. So but as an individual item, it should still remain valuable because he's saving it, and it's the individual item. Kamash Malan, that mitazarkala, it's a betula batli. No, since it's not alone of value, it's only valuable combined with the other things. It itself doesn't count as an intentional item unless he wants this. This is enough for it, and he wants to plant this alone. That's what makes it valuable. Combining it with other things does not make it valuable. The Mishnah continues. Somebody carried food out with the requisite amount, but he put it on a stoop. Whether he continued taking it from the stoop into the public domain, or if somebody else took it off the stoop into the public domain, Potter is going to be exempt. So as we said, you need one action of picking it up, taking it across, and putting it down. And over here, when you put it down on the stoop is going to break it. And as we're going to see, that the stoop is not a public domain and not a private domain. If it was a private domain, so when you pick it up from the stoop and putting it out, it's going to, when you put it out, that in and of itself is carrying from a private domain to public domain. Rather, from the private domain to the public domain, there's a break in between on a stoop that's neither public nor private, as we'll see in the Gemara. And he's going to be exempt because he didn't do all three steps that are requisite for carrying. He didn't do them all in one action. Kupa, if somebody has a basket, full of produce, and the Gemara is going to try and figure out what kind of produce are we talking about. But nasna skufa, and he puts that on the stoop. Even though that most of the fruit are outside of the stoop in the public domain. Pater Achietz's kol skufa is going to be exempt until the entire basket is going to be out of the stoop into the public domain. So haya skufa mai. What kind of stoop are we talking about? Ilema askufas rishus harabim. Is it actually a public domain? That meaning, When is a stoop a public domain? We've seen this early in the Masechta. It's 9 tefachim high, and it services the public domain for people to fix their wares on their shoulders. So they wear a sack. Somebody's carrying a sack heavy over their shoulders, and they need to readjust it, and they don't want to put the bag down on the floor. It's going to be too heavy to pick it back up. So they need something about 9 tefachim, about 3 feet off the ground, in order to be able to adjust it properly. So then this stoop of 9 tefachim actually services the wayfarers, the people traveling and carrying this stuff. And therefore, it is a part of the public domain. So if this stoop is a part of the public domain, pater, why would be exempt? When he takes it out of the house and puts it on the front stoop, in that case, he's going to be chayiv because he actually put it onto a public domain, even though that it's not, people can't travel there, but it is services the travelers, and so it's a part of the public domain. Well, then this platform, this stoop must be a private space, meaning it has walls and a roof or whatever it is, right? Well, when he takes it off from there and takes it into the public domain, whoever did that is transgressing, because they're picking something up in private. As soon as they cross the threshold of the stoop into public domain, they cross the line, and then they put it down. They do all 3 steps. So why would they be exempt? He's going to be exempt. He's carrying it from a private domain to a public domain. Ela askufa is karmelis. So this askufa must be a karmelis. What is the state of karmelis? As we saw at the beginning of the Masechta many times, it's neither a private domain, because it doesn't have the walls and the requisite size for private domain. And it's not a public domain, because it's not servicing easy walking, easy direction. So it's an in-between, and it's a rabbinic halachic space that you're not allowed to carry there. However, it's not biblical, and therefore, when somebody carries from the private domain and puts it down in there, or somebody carries from there into a public domain, or vice versa, it's not going to transgress. They will not transgress. So over here, when this person took it out of the house and put it down on the askufa, and either they or someone else then picks it up off the askufa and puts it into the public domain, they will not have transgressed, because it wasn't one action, because in between you had a non-biblical place that it was put into.
He gets Makos Bardus or anything, or nothing?
Well, it depends if it did so intentionally or whatever it is. But the point is that it's not the malacha of carrying is not going to be transgressed there.
He doesn't get skila.
It's not an action. It's nothing. He doesn't have to bring a chatas. The assumption is he did so unintentionally, and he's not going to need to bring a chatas offering. So what's the chiddush? Time the nachba karmelis. The reason is because it rested in this in-between space in the karmelis. Halay nachba karmelis. But if he had not put it down there, but rather walked across the askufa and then put it in the private domain, in the public domain. So somebody has a stoop, a ledge in front of their house. It's more than 3 tefachim off the public domain, but less than 9 tefachim. So it doesn't service the public. And he walks out of his house carrying this. So he's picked it up, carried it out, and put it down in the public domain. But in between, he was in no man's land. He walked across no man's land. Well, that doesn't change it. Since he didn't put it down in the eskufa, in the no man's land, in the karmelis, he just walked across the karmelis. That's not going to be enough to break the action. So the chiddush over here is that he actually put it down in the karmelis. But if he had not put it down in the karmelis, he would be chayiv in a sin offering. And maslita, the like of Ben Azai, and our Mishnah would then not be in concurrence with Ben Azai, as we learned at the beginning of Masechta. But Tanya, the Bryce teaches, somebody who takes something out of the private domain, out of his shop, into the public square, which is a public domain, but he does so through these pillars and these platforms that are in front of shops that people would have to hang their wares in, and it was sort of a non-easily travelable place. So it doesn't count as public domain because people window shop there and are buying there, and you can't really get through so easily. So that doesn't count as a public domain. Only the square itself, the open area, counts as public domain. And he carried it through from the shop, private domain, through the in-between space, into the public domain. Chayiv is going to be chayiv because it doesn't break it. However, Ben Azai says no, that the very walking through this in-between space is enough to break the action. Our Mishnah would concur with the Chachamim over there that say no. Only if you put it down in this Carmelis does it break the action, but if you just carried it through, it does not break the action. Tomorrow we'll continue with the bucket of produce to try and figure out what type of produce is it, that part of it, that since the entire bucket is not in the private domain, it would not count.